Wednesday, July 29th. Welcome back to SamCentre. I'm your host, Sam, and as always, it is CFL Wednesday. But before we get there, we have lots to talk about. We're going to have a bit of a chat about the UFC returning to Serbia for a fight night on Friday, highlighted by Uros Medic taking on Daniel Rodriguez. And then Coach Sam returns. Today, he's going to break down the Atlantic Coast Conference, the ACC, before we wrap up the show, talking the Week 9 matchups in the CFL. Everything you need to know. This is the one place you come for all your sports knowledge. Let's run the intro.
Hey everyone, Milt Stiegel here. Make sure you check out SamCentre. He's doing some of the best sports analysts out there, baby. Check him out.
And tonight, I submit to you that there's some family that drove from I don't know where, parked 5 miles out away from this stadium, and they saved all freaking year long just to buy a ticket to climb to the top of that stadium and watch your tail play. You owe them something.
All right, SamCentre. Coach Sam here to break down the Atlantic Coast Conference, the ACC. You see the notes and all the research we've done before us. Obviously, head over to our video that we released yesterday, where we broke down the entire conference in great detail. There's 18 teams that play football in this conference. I'm not going to bore you with every single one of them, but essentially, I broke the teams down into 3 tiers. There's 2 teams who I believe are simply not ready to compete at all this year. 12 teams that I believe could be in that mid-range. And then there's the Big 4. We'll talk about the Big 4 and a couple of those mid-range teams. But the reason I went down and broke down all the teams in the ACC is that the Atlantic Coast Conference is usually quite wide open. Obviously, there's top dogs like Notre Dame and Miami. And you would think to yourself, well, obviously they just win it every year. But last year's championship game was between Duke and Virginia, and that threw everything out of whack. The ACC was actually extremely consequential for the college football playoffs, and that was due to the fact that there was controversy around Notre Dame's scheduling. They obviously went in there and lost their game against Miami, and then they had lost their game on the road at Texas A&M. So there was no way for Notre Dame to play for the ACC championship game, and Miami as well had missed out on the opportunity, losing to SMU and losing it one other time in the conference as well. So that all threw it into chaos. Virginia and Duke played for the ACC title game, and neither team ended up making the college football playoffs. Duke were the champions last year, and good for them. Unfortunately, the Duke team, we don't have them in our Big 4 because they were decimated by transfers. That is something that is very common for the Atlantic Coast Conference. When we look at all of these teams, the biggest common theme was transfers. Transfers in, transfers out, lots of new coaching, lots of turnover on the coordinator positions. However, there's some teams like Pitt that have had their head coach for a lot of years. Pat Narduzzi over in Pittsburgh, he's been over there for 12 years. And you look at other programs that have really established head coaches. However, for those teams in that mid-tier, because it's so wide open, you really don't know what to expect. There's teams like University of North Carolina, led by head coach Bill Belichick and offensive coordinator Bobby Petrino. They brought in 20 new transfers. They brought in a new quarterback and completely changed the way that they're looking to do things. So you don't know a team like that with the head coach experience that they have, can they turn things around very quickly? Can a team like Cal, led by quarterback Jaron Sangapolutele, and yes, that's exactly how you say his name, we went and did our research, out of Hawaii, is it possible that Jaron and that team are able to pull off an upset or two in the ACC and then cement themselves as contenders? Because obviously things have been overhauled. They have first-year head coach Tosh Lupoli, and so there's a lot of reasons for teams like that to play. So you don't know who will be the next Duke. You don't know who will be the next Virginia. I'll put all 18 teams up on screen. Like I said, go check out the breakdown. But let's talk the Big 4. Southern Methodist University, SMU as they're known, a team that is always solid in the ACC. They're always right up there in contention. Just a few years ago, they made the college football playoffs, And if it wasn't for a couple close games last year, they would have been right at the top of the ACC once again. Led by head coach Rhett Lashley and fifth-year senior quarterback Kevin Jennings, the room that they have on offense is pretty good. Cal running back came over as a transfer. They got a couple wide receiver transfers and tight end transfers, but for the most part, the offensive line and the skills position, they have some returning guys, some new blood in that room, and it should be good as always. Kevin Jennings is not a guy that's going to be a first-round draft pick in the NFL. However, he's a really good fifth-year senior. He knows the offense, and they got a lot of guys on the defensive side of the ball. They have an extremely talented group of linebackers, a new group in the secondary, a completely new group of cornerbacks, which hopefully is going to make things a lot better for them, and then a good safety that they can look back and say, okay, so now we have a cornerback and a secondary that can compete, a D-line that is big enough and talented enough to compete with the big dogs in the ACC, and then a group of linebackers that hopefully gets to the quarterback, an offense that's experienced and can move the ball with a good offensive line, control the game at the end. And then the biggest reason I have them in Contender Series is because no Miami, no Duke, no Clemson, Georgia Tech, North Carolina State, or Pittsburgh. So you've already eliminated a lot of the more difficult teams in the conference. Unfortunately, I did leave out one of the big guns. They do have to go at Notre Dame on the road and play them this year. So that could be a huge hiccup for them. If Notre Dame is as locked in as we think they are, that's probably a loss. They also have to go on the road at Florida State. So that could be a tough place to play. However, I think SMU finishes around that 9-win mark. They could surprise, maybe get to 10 wins, and then be competing for the ACC championship game, or at least be in consideration. And the team that was in there last year, Virginia, the reason we have them in the top 4 and maybe not a team like Duke is because Tony Elliott retooled his team a lot better than the Duke squad, which ended up losing their starting quarterback, their starting wide receiver, and a lot of things for Duke. Unfortunately, when you have a great season like that, teams like Miami are going to swoop in and take your talent. We're going to talk about them in a minute. However, the Virginia team led by Tony Elliott, they were a team that obviously made it to the championship game last year. They have a really good offense and a good offensive line. That's the biggest thing for them. It should be one of the best offensive lines in the entire ACC, and they have new talent, running back transfers, and they lost their best wide receiver to Oklahoma in the portal. So they had to retool at a lot of their skilled positions. Hopefully that makes a big difference because the offense for Virginia last year was really good. One of the best in the entire ACC, one of the best in college football. So they're hoping that continues. They brought in quarterbacks from Missouri, from Pittsburgh. So there should be a bit of a competition, but both guys are experienced. Both guys have talent. There's reason for optimism in Virginia again. They should have a really good defensive line, an overall well-rounded defense. And because they're coached well, Virginia is always live to surprise people. I have them in the top 4. However, I do think this conference is a clear 1-2 punch led by Notre Dame and Miami. And let's talk first the University of Miami, the Hurricanes, the U, led by Mario Cristobal. In 24 years, they haven't won the ACC. To me, that's absolutely insane that a team of the caliber of Miami has not won the ACC, their own conference, in 24 years. This could be the year because as much as they got extremely close last year, losing by 6 points in the national championship game, a game against Indiana, which honestly was winnable, if not for a couple mental errors and a last-minute interception by Carson Beck, your quarterback. So a lot has changed. Carson Beck going to the NFL. You lost a lot of offense and defensive talent to the NFL as well. 3 first-round picks from your team went into the NFL. You had an offensive lineman, 2 defensive linemen, you had cornerbacks gone. So that's the biggest thing, right? For Miami, how do they retool? Do they retool quickly? Obviously, they have the pedigree of being a high-level school. They have the history. They have the championship-level experience. They weren't able to get over the hump. But a guy like Mario Cristobal, an extremely good head coach, he knows how to recruit. He went in the transfer portal and he got Duke's top wide receiver, and he got their quarterback in Darian Mensah, a guy that was the whole reason the Duke squad made it to the ACC championship game last year. So now when you're retooling, you retool in about the best way possible. I'm not concerned at all with the offensive line, even though they lost 3 guys off of that line, including 1 to the top 10 in the NFL. I still think they retooled extremely well. The defensive line, having 2 first-round draft picks on it was huge. However, they have a future first-round pick on that line again. The linebacker core should be great. Miami is going to be in contention. They might drop a game or two early. They might drop that game against Notre Dame as sort of a revenge for the Notre Dame squad. But ultimately, I see this Miami team winning 10 to 11 games and potentially making it back to the college football playoffs or maybe even the ACC championship game. However, my prediction for the best team in this conference, it's going to be Notre Dame. They are set up at every single position the same way as Miami, but in my opinion, on a different level. Notre Dame, in the same way last year, they have a bit of disappointment to their season. They have reasons to play for. They went out there and they said they were upset with the ACC because of the way that they were treated, but it's not their fault that you lost 2 games. Yes, they were very close defeats, losing by 4 points combined to Miami and Texas A&M, and Miami obviously being the team that ended up in the national championship game. So for Marcus Freeman's squad over at Notre Dame, led by quarterback CJ Carr, who's just a sophomore, but I think this might be his last year in college football. I think CJ Carr is one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. He's going to surprise everybody this year because this team is absolutely loaded. They have the potential for the number 1 overall pick at quarterback. They did lose both of their running backs in the first round. However, they completely retooled. They have an absolutely loaded skills position around CJ. This year, they might throw the ball a lot more than run, at least at the very beginning. Obviously, you lose your 2 extremely good running backs. That carries your offense a lot. But I'm not worried about it due to the level of talent they have at wide receiver. They have a tight end, in my opinion, who is going to be a first 3-round pick next year anyways. They have potentially the best offensive line in the country. They have 9 returning starters on defense, but for a team like Notre Dame, they were able to retool through the portal and bring in a lot of guys who could start at other programs to simply be depth here at Notre Dame. That's why I believe this team, Marcus Freeman needs to show that he can win the big games coaching. CJ Carr needs to prove that as well in offense. They need to be healthy, and that's the biggest thing. But this defense is great. This offense should be the best in the country, or at least top 5 in the country, especially at throwing the ball. And the biggest issue last year was they could not kick the ball. So you're losing by 1 point, losing by 3 points, because in the last 6 games of the season, you literally didn't make a field goal. So they went out to the portal, they got Purdue's starting kicker. I think he's decent enough. He should be able to make the ones that he needs to make. And if that's the case, look for Notre Dame to make the college football playoffs. And in my opinion, they are a sneaky team to actually make the national championship game this year. I wonder if they're going to win the ACC. I think Notre Dame's on a bit of a warpath and they're just going to try their best to come and win the championship game. It might be them versus Miami, them versus SMU, Virginia, maybe one of these other team surprises. However, that's all the time we have for today. Go check out the full breakdown where we talk all 18 teams. I'm going to throw it back to you, Sam. Thank you, Coach Sam. Great breakdown on the ACC. Obviously, a much more condensed version than what we put out yesterday. However, if you're interested in hearing more, go check out the full 30-minute breakdown that Coach Sam put out detailing the 2026 Atlantic Coast Conference. Moving on to CFL Wednesday, though, you see the standings beside me. At this point in the season, we kind of know who the teams are. Toronto being on a bye week, unsure if Chad Kelly's going to miss any time or if he'll be able to return the following week. But one more injury to note, James Butler, the running back for the BC Lions, is questionable for his game Thursday night against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And that's the first game that we'll talk about because BC, being 1-5, heading on the road to Winnipeg, this is a game that Winnipeg cannot afford to lose. And on the flip side for the Lions, you also cannot afford to lose this game. Going to 1-6 essentially ends your season. And for Winnipeg, now with the loss from the Riders the previous week, and with the Riders heading into Edmonton to take on the Elks again, the West is wide open for that second place. There is potential for you to move up the standings. You can't have any lapses against a really beat up BC Lions team. Obviously missing Nathan Rourke, potentially missing their starting running back as well. Caden Salter is going to take over at quarterback for the BC Lions, and I think this is a really good move for them. Caden Salter is a guy that I've really liked throughout his entire NCAA career. He was really good at Liberty, and then obviously transferred over to Colorado to end his career over there. Mixed bag, but that Colorado team was severely missing a lot of talent. after that first year where they had Shadir and all of their playmakers. They were decimated, a lot of transfers left, and they were left with Caden Salter, a mix of what they have, and it didn't go great. However, he showed in college he can move the ball through the air and on the ground, and I think that's a really good recipe to be a CFL quarterback. Unfortunately, he's getting thrown into the fire a little bit on a short week with a really poor BC Lions team, an offensive line that cannot seem to protect anyone, a running game that could be compromised. Caden Salter might have to be Superman in order to take home the win here. Official prediction, I think it might be another lower scoring game, as the offense on both sides has struggled. I would think Drew Brown does bounce back. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers end up winning this game 28-12, something along those lines. I really hope Caden Salter can put up a little bit more of a fight. So maybe we'll see something like a 28-21, but I don't have a lot of faith in the BC Lions offense right now, and especially not a short week, a quarterback making his first career CFL start and missing your starting running back. Seems like a recipe for disaster to go on the road in a packed house in Winnipeg. But we're going to have to see. Thursday Night Football, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Friday's game, the Montreal Alouettes taking on the Ottawa Redblacks. And this is a game that, again, might be like the first one, a bit of a blowout, but anything can happen. Montreal hosted Hamilton last week and looked really beatable for 3 quarters, and then they took over in the 4th quarter of that game. And in this game, Ottawa, you see them winless still. I'm not sure this is the week they join the Victory Monday board, and at this point, they might never join it. Montreal has shown a couple cracks, but ultimately, last week against Hamilton, outside of a return touchdown and a few mistakes that the special teams made for the Montreal Alouettes in those first couple quarters, they played really well. They didn't really allow Trey Ford and the Hamilton offense to move the ball whatsoever, and then they came up clutch in the 4th quarter when they needed it, defeating Hamilton and moving to 6-1 in the CFL. The top dog in the East, and I don't expect anything to change for this game. Ottawa has not shown us that they are capable of putting up a fight really in these past couple weeks. They obviously looked good on the road against Montreal, and they've looked decent in a couple games against Saskatchewan and Edmonton. Outside of that, they've been blown out and they've looked really unimpressive on offense. However, Montreal last week showed they could potentially be beatable. They've obviously lost this season to Edmonton. Going on the road to Ottawa, I do not expect this to be a loss. I expect this to be a massive bounce back opportunity for the Montreal Alouettes. Let's go 38-17 Montreal with the biggest blowout of the week happening. And unfortunately, that might be the story of this CFL Week 9. Not a ton to get excited about. As we move on, we're talking Calgary and Hamilton. Calgary, a team that has been scoring at will recently. 52 points in their most recent game. And they're going to head over to Hamilton, a team that doesn't seem like they're going to be able to match the firepower of the Calgary Stampeders whatsoever. Unfortunately for the Hamilton Ticats, losing Bo Levi Mitchell, this would have been such an exciting game because it most likely would have been Calgary on a roll, Hamilton battling for second in the East, the storyline with Bo Levi playing his former team in Calgary. But ultimately, things change. It's a long season. Injuries happen. And so the Hamilton Ticats, post Bo Levi Mitchell, the offense has not looked that impressive. This is a potential opportunity for them to do a little bit more as Calgary's defense has given up points. Obviously, they scored 52 last week and picked off Drew Brown 4 times, so things might be starting to change a little bit. But even after pulling off 4 interceptions, you still gave up 30 points to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and their backup quarterback. So there might be cracks at the seam. I still think Calgary is clearly the 3rd best team in the West right now. And they need these wins against the Eastern Conference if there's going to be a crossover opportunity for the playoffs. So give me Calgary to go out there. It could be a fairly tight game in the first half because Hamilton's defense, to their credit, did play pretty well against Montreal, played pretty well against Toronto. That's been the one thing that can keep them in games. So if they can put on a good performance in front of their home crowd, look for the first half to maybe be competitive, but I expect Calgary to pull away, win this game by a score of 35-24. Moving on, final game of the week, the Saturday doubleheader. The Saskatchewan Roughriders heading over to Edmonton, a rematch of last week. Saskatchewan looking to get their revenge, heading to Commonwealth, and a battle for first place in the West. This game will most likely decide who gets first place in the Western Conference. And for Saskatchewan, it's a game you really want to win. Get your win back against Edmonton and more importantly, put a little bit of distance between you and Calgary and you and Winnipeg. Because now the top of the West is starting to get a little bit convoluted, and obviously all the teams over here are pretty lucky that the East is struggling the way it is, because if it isn't, the things could look a little bit different. I still think ultimately Saskatchewan, with the championship experience, there was a really winnable game for them last week. A couple different opportunities. Obviously, there was calls by the ref. There was sloppy play from both teams, really. But Edmonton hitting a 57-yard field goal at the end of the regulation time, winning that game, now moving up to 6-1. For Saskatchewan being 4-2, with Winnipeg having 4 wins behind you and most likely having a very winnable game this week. This is a big game for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I'm actually going to call an upset. I'm going to say Saskatchewan goes into Edmonton and beats the Edmonton Elks in another really close game. Give me Saskatchewan by a score of 31-25. And that will wrap up our Week 9 slate of games. Obviously, the Toronto Argonauts on a bye, hoping that they can heal up Chad Kelly and that offense. And if he's not ready to go, then Nick Arbuckle will be ready to step up with a full week of practice coming off of a bye week. And they can return home back to their stadium. They've done a lot on their social media talking about moving back in. All right, another excellent show. We were able to talk the Atlantic Coast Conference, talk the Week 9 matchups in the CFL, and then to wrap it up, on Friday, we're going to break down in bigger detail the UFC returning to Serbia, Uros Medic, a guy with a 100% finish rate in his 13 wins and in his 3 losses as well. So a guy that no matter what wants to go out there, put on action for the fans. He's going to be headlining the card against Daniel Rodriguez. Daniel Rodriguez, obviously recently released from Mexican prison, heading over to Serbia, fighting the hometown guy. Jan Blachowicz takes on undefeated 10-0 prospect Navajo Sterling in the co-main event. And we have Alexander Rakic taking on Marcin Tybura at his heavyweight debut. So, should be a lot of fun card to break down. We're going to talk about it in more depth on Friday. There are obviously 8 fighters making their debuts, so SamCentre needs to go do the tape study. Thank you once again for being here. Please like, please comment, please subscribe. SamCentre out.
Yo, I'm sat on the throne, but I'm looking at the blueprints. Building a temple where the spirit leaves its footprints. You be a knight's the most high. Asked what I'm needing, didn't ask for peas or for enemies to be bleeding. I asked for the wisdom, the hokmah, the insight to distinguish the dark from the frequency of light. See, I built the first house, cedar, wood and gold plate between Jashin and Boaz, standing at the gate. The pillars of the world, severity and mercy. The path is narrow, man, the road is getting thirsty, but the temple laid stone, that's the trick for the blind. The real masonry is the structure of the mind. Seal of the king, 2 triangles entwined. The lower reflecting the upper design. Master of the spirits, I made the demons work. Building up the temple where the shadows used to lurk. It's the wisdom of Solomon, the heavyweight crown. Building up the spirit while the system falling down. Building up the spirit. Yeah, they say I had the ring, the brass and the iron, commanding the glacier, the wolf and the lion. See, the demons are just facets of the ego and the greed. I harness the shadows to plant the holy seed. You gotta kill the beast, you gotta make it move the blocks. Put the vices in the furnace, turning keys inside the lock. 72 spirits, yeah, I kept them in the vessel. Every conscious man has a demon he must wrestle. If you don't control the lower, then the lower controls you. That's how the temple falls and the spirit gets through. I saw the vanity, the chasing of the wind, but the wisdom is the treasure underneath the skin. I sat with the queen, yeah, Sheba brought the riddle, trying to find a center, not the sides or the middles. She saw your cupbearer, the order of the table. Realize the history is more than just a fable. It's the key of Solomon, the magic in the map, finding your geometry on the righteous path. From the quarry to the corner, I'm the stone they rejected. To the master workman saw the spirit was perfected. Modern day Solomon, I'm building in the ends, turning all the haters and the demons into friends. The temple is complete when the heart is in tune. From the rising of the sun to the setting of the moon. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity unless you know the